Okay, in this video, I'm going to break down and go over and explain how to correctly place an offer on a foreclosure, what you need to know and understand, and what you can expect from the corporate seller. Placing an offer on a foreclosure is not that different than placing an offer on a typical retail property, but there's one major difference, and that's going to be seller addendums. This is probably one of the biggest concepts that you need to understand, is that you're always going to have seller addendums on a foreclosure. There's no way corporate sellers could ever stay on top of all 50 states and all of the many different contracts that are out there, so they have their own addendums. And the addendums, and this is an important part to remember, they are always going to supersede your local contract. So what does that mean? That means if anything goes down, the sellers are going to go by the addendums, okay? Because you're going to see all the terms that the seller agreed to are going to be in those addendums. And another thing for the agents out there, this really means you're going to be writing your contract normally twice. Rarely do I see a corporate seller accept an offer just as it's submitted. They're normally countering something, which means the terms they're going to accept normally are going to be a little bit different than the terms that you originally submitted. Here's a couple quick things you need to know and remember about the addendums. You can't write on them. You can't scratch anything out. You can't change anything. Those addendums are set in stone. You're either signing it or you're not buying the property. And I can tell you, after 20-something years of doing this, I think maybe one time in my entire career, a buyer walked away because he didn't want to sign the addendums. So don't stress out about the addendums. Everyone buying a property from that seller is signing that very same addendum in all 50 states. So as far as the offer goes, there's really going to be two parts. The first one's going to be your local state contract, and if you have the option, always use an as-is contract. It's not a deal killer, but if given the option, go with an as-is contract. And second, you're going to have your proof of funds or your lender pre-qualification, pre-approval letter. So here's a key point. To submit an offer on a foreclosure, you're going to have one of these documents. If you're paying cash, proof of funds. If you're financing, you're either going to have a letter from the lender or you're going to have a letter from your hard money lender. Just so everybody out there hears me on this, hard money is not cash. No corporate seller considers hard money lending as a cash deal. Most all of my corporate sellers will accept hard money, but it's not considered as cash. So once your offer is submitted, next thing's going to happen, the seller's going to produce their addendum. They're going to give them to the listing agent or send them directly to the buyer's agent. At that point, the agent's going to take the state contract. They're going to make any changes so the contract mirrors the actual addendum that was presented or produced from the seller. They're going to have to match perfectly. I mean, everything. So normally that means, like I said earlier, that there's going to have to be some changes to the original contract. And that's common on 99.9% of every deal. So that just means the actual contract package is going to have roughly three parts. You're going to have your state contract, you're going to have the seller addendums, and you're going to have your proof of funds / pre-qual letter. But just know 99% of all the corporate addendums are going to have their lead-based paint in the addendum somewhere. Fannie has it, SPS, Freddie. Most all of the big companies are going to have the lead-based paint in their addendums also. I want to mention this before I forget, and I know I will, but if you're one of those out there that are still using letters of intent, please don't use one on a foreclosure. There's just nothing a listing agent can do with a letter of intent. The corporate sellers don't want to see letters, they only want to see contracts. I'm going to wrap it up in just a minute, but I've got a couple more key points I want to make and go over and explain about the contract. Of course, we've already discussed you're going to use an as-is contract. What about the seller name? I get this question a lot from agents that want to know what name to use as a seller. Well, here's the best advice I can give you. First, you want to try and use what's on the public records, but a lot of times it's not been updated or the information's wrong. If you can't find the name, don't worry about it. Just put down owner of record. You're going to get a chance to correct it once you get the addendums, and the addendums will definitely have the seller's correct name on it. Okay, EMD. A corporate seller will never accept a $500 EMD for a foreclosure. At least all the major servicers and sellers won't ever accept $500. It's too small. The minimum is going to be $1,000. The bigger EMD is going to do nothing but help your chances of getting your offer accepted. The only foreclosures that I know that'll take $500 are some of the HUD properties, and that's based on the price. Keep your inspection days as short as you possibly can. And my best advice, never go over 10. If you go over 10 days, they're going to counter that. I don't know of a corporate seller I've ever worked with that goes past 10 days. Most of them won't even do 10 days, but Fannie Mae's guidelines is for 10 days. So my advice to everyone is always, if you're going to ask for days and you want, 2 weeks, cut it down to 10. Putting in 15 days, which our contract defaults if left blank to 15 days, it's gonna get you a counter. So keep your inspection days as short as possible. This is another thing that's really gonna help get your offer accepted. The goal usually is gonna be between 5 and 7 calendar days. Do not add any extra contingencies to your contract. That's gonna get you rejected or countered immediately. Just don't add anything, it's that simple. They're never gonna take added contingencies or added verbiage in your contract. And remember, the seller's addendums are always going to supersede the local contract anyway. Okay, the last thing I wanna go over is gonna be closing costs. How do closing costs work, what you need to know, and what you can expect from the corporate sellers. Now this is gonna be for the state of Florida, but I know it's gonna be similar in all 50 states. But if you're in the state of Florida and the seller is not exempt, and the only time you're gonna see sellers that are exempt from different tax stuff is gonna be your GSEs or your government entity, like your Fannie Mae, Freddie Macs. Those companies sometimes are gonna be exempt, so make sure you do a little bit of research, talk to your agent, find out exactly what closing costs they will pay. But here's how basically it's gonna break down. Here in the state of Florida, the corporate sellers are generally gonna always pay the deed doc tax stamps and the owner's title policy. Now that is, as a buyer, if the buyer chooses to utilize the services of the chosen title company for the corporate seller, then they're gonna pay the owner's title policy. This can definitely add up, especially if the property's more expensive. So the big question for a buyer is, do you really wanna utilize your own title company wherever you are locally? Or would you rather have the seller pay for it and utilize their title company? In my opinion, I always would rather go with the seller's title company for many reasons, but A, they're used to it, they know what they're doing. I know a lot of agents out there do push their buyers to utilize a local company because they want somebody they're familiar with to deal with the property. And the one good thing about using a local company, the local title company is gonna be the one that has to deal with the bank's closing attorney firm or title company. Here in Florida, it's always done in South Florida. So if you're like us up here in North Florida, nothing's ever closed locally. It's always closed from South Florida. So a lot of agents would rather have their buyers utilize a company locally to make the transition maybe go smoother. But here's the kicker. If you do your own title company, you're going to have to pay the owner's title policy. That means the seller is only going to pay the deed doc stamps. So the way this breaks down, if it's a cash transaction, there's really only two main closing costs, and that's the deed doc stamps and that's the owner title policy. If you're financing, then you have all the financing charges that go along with it. The bank's never gonna pay those. They are only gonna pay the deed doc stamps and the owner's title policy, no matter if it's cash or if it's financing. So if you're paying cash and you utilize the bank's title company, you're basically not gonna be paying any title costs. You're gonna have a couple $100 here and there they're gonna charge you anyway, but you don't have the bulk of any cost if you're paying cash and you use their title company. So the bottom line is either use their title company and they pay, or use your own and you end up paying. I personally don't see a benefit big enough to utilize a local company after 20-something years doing this. I just know that these title companies in South Florida do this every day. They do a lot of it. They kind of know what they're doing, and they can get things sometimes pushed through that local companies can't. So just keep that in mind. Okay, that'll do it for this video. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. If you have any questions, leave them below. And as always, thanks. Have a great day.